He's three law firms on retainer. I don't know how much money is coming in, but I know that a lot of money is going out every single month for Diddy.
For years, the story of Tupac Shakur's murder seemed settled in the court of public opinion. The man at the center of it all, Duane Keefe D. Davis, openly bragged about being inside the car the night the rap legend was gunned down in Las Vegas in 1996. He talked about it in interviews. He talked about it in documentaries. And in 2019, he even published a memoir, Compton Street Legend, where he described the shooting in vivid detail: the white Cadillac, the Glock .40, the seating positions, even a rumored $1 million bounty connected to the killing. For decades, those statements floated around as shocking confessions, but not criminal charges, until 2023, a Nevada grand jury finally turned those same stories into an indictment. Suddenly, the man who once spoke freely about the murder now says something very different. According to his new legal strategy, much of what he said publicly was fiction. Exaggerated storytelling he believed was protected by immunity. And now, in a dramatic twist, Keefe D's defense wants one man to testify in court: Sean Diddy Combs. The confessions that became evidence prosecutors say the case against Keefe D is unusually straightforward. They didn't need a secret witness, they didn't uncover hidden surveillance. Instead, they used Keefe D's own words. In interviews and in his memoir, he placed himself inside the white Cadillac the night Tupac was shot. He described the weapon, the car, and even the sequence of events. According to investigators, those public statements, especially after 2018, reignited the long-cold case. But now that trial is approaching, the tone has changed. What once sounded like proud storytelling now looks to prosecutors like self-incrimination. And the defense says the story was never meant to be taken literally. The night everything happened, the official motive has always been simple. On September 7, 1996, Tupac and Suge Knight were leaving the MGM Grand Las Vegas after a Mike Tyson fight. Inside the casino, Tupac was caught on serve.
Well, I think some of it did have to do with that battery by a prisoner case, which he went to trial on and was found guilty. I think in some ways it can be like a sports team. If you come up short, sometimes you need to change the leadership.
Hours later, a white Cadillac pulled up beside Tupac's BMW on the Las Vegas Strip. Shots were fired. 6 days later, Tupac Shakur was dead. For years, investigators believed the casino fight triggered the retaliation. Case closed. Except Keefe D's own stories complicated that explanation, because in multiple interviews and in his book, he suggested something bigger: money. The $1 million question, according to Keefe D's earlier claims, there was a conversation with Sean Diddy Combs. In those accounts, Keefe D alleged that Diddy was fearful of Suge Knight and offered $1 million to have Tupac killed. He even described alleged meetings discussing the plan. But he also said something strange: the money was never paid. That detail raises serious questions. If the bounty was real, why didn't the payment happen? And if the story was fake, why repeat the same specific number for years? Now Keefe D's defense team wants to subpoena Diddy to testify under oath. It's a massive gamble. If Diddy denies the
Pac would have boxed him. Pac would have loved to beat his ass in the ring, raise some money, and give it to the hood.
bounty story completely, the defense can argue Keefe D exaggerated everything for fame. But if even a small part of the story is confirmed, the case could suddenly expand far beyond one defendant. The immunity confusion part of Keefe D's defense hinges on something that happened years earlier. In 2008, he participated in a proffer session with law enforcement while discussing another case. He believed those statements protected him from prosecution related to Tupac's murder. But legal experts say there's a major misunderstanding. Immunity from a proffer only covers statements made during that session. It does not protect. And that's exactly where Keefe D repeated the story, again and again. By the time his book came out in 2019, prosecutors say he had provided years of voluntary admissions. The missing player's another complication in the case is that many of the people connected to the story are no longer alive.
D named Diddy 77 times in court documents related to Tupac.
Orlando Anderson, the man Tupac fought that night, was killed in 1998. Others allegedly connected to the gun or the events have also died. That leaves Keefe D as the only living suspect authorities can charge, which means his words carry enormous weight, but they also carry enormous risk. Diddy's legal storm, meanwhile, Sean Diddy Combs, is already dealing with massive legal trouble of his own. In 2005, he was sentenced to 50 months in federal prison after being acquitted of racketeering, but convicted on transportation-related charges. His appeal is scheduled for April 2026. His financial empire has also taken a major hit. Once estimated near $1 billion, his net worth is now believed to be between $400 and $600 million, while dozens of civil lawsuits continue to pile up. Being dragged into a high-profile 1996 murder trial would add yet another layer of risk. Even without charges, the reputational damage could be enormous. The story refuses to die. The Tupac case never existed in isolation. It sits inside the larger history of the East Coast versus West Coast hip-hop rivalry. The tension intensified after the Quad Studios shooting, where Tupac survived being shot 5 times. In interviews afterward, he suggested certain powerful figures knew more than they admitted. Those suspicions never led to charges, but they never disappeared either. And when the notorious B.I.G. was killed in 1997, the mystery only deepened. No one was ever charged in that case either. A trial that could rewrite history. Now everything may come down to one courtroom. If Diddy testifies and denies everything, Keefe D may argue his past stories were exaggerated for attention. If testimony reveals even partial truth, the narrative could explode into something far larger than a single indictment. For prosecutors, the challenge is keeping the case simple. For the defense, the strategy may be to make it as complicated as possible, because in the end, the question remains the same. Was Tupac's death a spontaneous act of revenge after?
4 years, 2 months in prison.
Wow.
He served a year. He gets some time. He gets 15% credit, so he'd be at 14-ish.
2.5 years.
2 months. So, and then he gets another 15% in the remaining.
Yeah.
He's out in 2 years.
Yeah. Should have stuck with the original guess.
I know.
Yeah.
Now, it may finally be tested under oath. And if the only living witness starts rewriting his own story, the question becomes even more unsettling. What if everything we thought we knew about that night was wrong? If you want, I can also create YouTube title, viral style description, plus SEO keywords, thumbnail text, high CTR for this video. Here are more extended continuation paragraphs you can use to expand the script and keep the tension building for a long YouTube documentary style video. But the deeper this case goes, the harder it becomes to separate memory from mythology. For nearly 3 decades, the murder of Tupac Shakur has lived in a strange space between criminal investigation and cultural legend. Every interview, every documentary, every former insider claiming to know what really happened has added another layer to a story that refuses to stay buried. Now, with Duane Keefe D. Davis facing trial, those layers are being peeled back in a courtroom where exaggeration is no longer entertainment, it is evidence. Legal analysts say this is what makes the case so unusual. Most murder prosecutions rely on forensic breakthroughs, witness testimony, or newly discovered evidence. Here, the foundation of the indictment is something far more unpredictable: the defendant's own public storytelling. For years, Keefe D spoke as if the statute of limitations and his alleged immunity protected him. He described the events with the confidence of someone who believed the past was untouchable. Now the same words are being dissected line by prosecutors, preparing to show a jury that the difference between bragging and confessing is sometimes just a courtroom. The defense, however, sees an opportunity in that same history. Their argument is simple but risky. A man who spent years building a reputation as a street legend may have embellished the truth to make his story more dramatic. In their view, the interviews, the book, and the documentaries were less about accuracy
In New York City, we are hearing Diddy's attorneys speaking to the media after he was sentenced earlier today. This is live.
Yeah, we are planning to appeal.
I want to hear them, bro.
We are planning to appeal. We think we have strong basis.
If the jury believes Keefe D exaggerated for fame, the prosecution's strongest evidence could suddenly look unreliable. But if the jury believes his earlier statements were genuine admissions, the defense's explanation may collapse entirely. And this is where Sean Diddy Combs becomes central to the narrative again. For years, Diddy has denied any involvement in Tupac's death. His representatives have repeatedly dismissed the bounty claims as completely false and ridiculous. Yet Keefe D's repeated references to Diddy in interviews, books and recordings mean the defense now sees strategic value in forcing him into the conversation directly. A subpoena would do something the rumor mill never could. It would require sworn testimony. Under oath, every answer matters. Every denial is recorded. Every contradiction can be examined by attorneys on both sides. And once testimony becomes part of the official record, it carries a legal weight that decades of speculation never had. Some legal observers believe this is exactly why the defense wants Diddy involved. If he testifies...
So these are fluorescent lights.
Yeah.
And you're sleeping in that light. What was the first night there?
First night was very intense. Again, I'm, coming down off and by that time, the second time I went in, between the two times I got into
and firmly denies the bounty story, the defense can argue that Keefe D was exaggerating all along. But if questioning opens even the smallest crack in that narrative, a conversation, a misunderstanding, a vague acknowledgement of past tensions, the implications could reach far beyond the current charges. Meanwhile, prosecutors must walk a careful line. Their case is strongest when it focuses on a simple explanation: retaliation following the violent confrontation at the MGM Grand Las Vegas on the night of September 7, 1996. Surveillance footage shows Tupac confronting Orlando Anderson, and investigators believe that humiliation triggered the fatal response hours later on the Las Vegas Strip. Introducing the idea of a paid hit complicates that narrative.
The reason we asked everyone to be here today is obviously we are the new attorneys for Duane Davis in the Tupac case, now set for trial February of next year. The reason in particular that we asked the media to be here is that, obviously we're not trying the case in the media, but we want to establish better relations with the...
Too much emphasis on a bounty risks turning the trial into a sprawling investigation of hip-hop rivalries, record label conflicts, and decades-old allegations. Too little emphasis, however, could allow the defense to argue that prosecutors are ignoring alternative explanations for what happened that night. Behind the scenes, insiders describe both legal teams preparing for a battle that is as much about storytelling as it is about law. Every timeline, every interview clip, every old quote is being analyzed for how it might appear to a jury hearing the case for the first time. Because for younger jurors, the East Coast-West Coast rivalry may feel like ancient history. But in the 1990s, it shaped the entire culture of hip-hop. The rivalry between artists connected to Death Row Records and Bad Boy Records dominated headlines, fueled diss tracks, and blurred the line between competition and hostility. At the center of that tension were towering figures like Suge Knight, Tupac, and Diddy himself. What began as music industry rivalry gradually turned into something darker, a climate where rumors, threats, and violence became part of the background noise of fame. By the time Tupac was killed in Las Vegas, the feud had already reached a boiling point, and when the notorious B.I.G. was murdered just 6 months later in Los Angeles, the sense that the hip-hop world had lost control became impossible to ignore. Two of the most influential rappers in history were gone. Two cases remained unsolved for decades. That unresolved history is why the Tupac trial carries such enormous cultural weight today. It is not just about determining the guilt or innocence of one man. For many people, it represents the first real chance in nearly 30 years to confront the truth behind one of the most infamous crimes in music history.
So she testified, excuse me, that she was Diddy's ex-assistant. She said he her, sexually assaulted her in various ways multiple times. He exacted unbelievable violence against her, threatened her, one point allegedly threatened to take her phone and use anything on the...
But truth inside a courtroom is rarely simple. Witnesses forget details, memories change over time, motives become tangled with reputation, fear, and loyalty. And when the people involved spent decades shaping their own public narratives, separating fact from performance becomes even harder. For Keefe D, the stakes could not be higher. If convicted, he faces the possibility of spending the rest of his life behind bars. For Diddy, the stakes are different, but still significant. Even without criminal charges, being tied publicly to the events surrounding Tupac's murder could deepen the legal and reputational crisis he is already facing. And for the public, the trial promises something that has been missing since 1996: answers. Whether those answers confirm the long-held theory of retaliation after a casino fight or reveal a deeper conspiracy involving money and power remains to be seen. What is certain is that the story is entering a new phase. For decades, it lived in interviews, rumors, and documentaries. Now it will unfold where stories are tested the hardest, under oath, in front of a jury, with consequences that cannot be edited or rewritten. And when that testimony begins, the truth about the night Tupac Shakur was shot may finally move from legend into history. If you want, I can also give you 3 to 4 more dramatic ending sections that make the video 20+ minutes long and boost watch time, YouTube algorithm style. Here are more extended continuation sections you can add to make the script longer, deeper, and more suspenseful for a YouTube documentary-style video. What makes this moment so volatile is not just the age of the case, but the collision of timelines now happening all at once. A murder from 1996, a memoir from 2019, an indictment in 2002-03, a federal sentence for Sean Diddy Combs in 2002-05, and a homicide trial that could finally bring decades of rumors into sworn testimony. Each of these moments was once isolated. Now they are stacked together, forming a legal press.
We've done 3 others where we've laid out the prosecution case. This time, we're talking specifically, what is Diddy's defense? And we decided to test it with a mock jury, and it is fascinating.
It is absolutely fascinating, keeping in mind that the real jury will be sitting down to do this. The trial starts first.
Inside the prosecution strategy, the core argument remains remarkably straightforward. They believe Duane Keefe D. Davis confessed repeatedly over the course of years, not under coercion, not during an interrogation, but voluntarily, and often proudly, in front of cameras and microphones. Investigators point to the consistency of certain details in those statements. The vehicle description, the weapon, the positioning of the passengers, as signs that the narrative was rooted in real events rather than invention. The defense, however, is preparing to challenge that interpretation piece by piece. Their argument is that storytelling inside the culture surrounding the Tupac case has always carried a certain level of performance. In their view, claiming proximity to one of the most infamous moments in hip-hop history can bring attention, interviews, documentary deals, and book contracts. When someone spends years repeating a dramatic story to maintain that attention, exaggeration can slowly become indistinguishable from truth. That distinction can become one of the most important questions the jury faces. Was Keefe D describing real events, or was he building a legend around himself? The answer may depend on how convincingly prosecutors connect his words to the timeline of the night Tupac was killed. Another factor complicating the case is the gradual disappearance of many people who might have clarified the story. Over the decades since the shooting, several individuals connected to the narrative have died. Among them is Orlando Anderson, the man Tupac confronted at the MGM Grand Las Vegas hours before the drive-by. For years, investigators believed Anderson was the most likely shooter, but Anderson himself denied involvement before he was killed in a separate gang-related incident in 1998.
Had day 17 on the Diddy trial as the biggest one yet. Guess what? Bingo, you won, because today was probably the most eventful day as far as things that happened that were said on the stand, and most importantly, things that the judge said, because Diddy almost got kicked out of his own.
Other names that appear in Keefe D's past statements have also faded from the record through time. That reality leaves prosecutors with a case built heavily around the testimony and statements of a single surviving participant. In some ways, that simplifies the narrative. In others, it makes the credibility battle even more intense. Because when one voice dominates the story, every contradiction becomes amplified. And Keefe D's public record contains plenty of contradictions. Then there is the lingering shadow of the broader hip-hop rivalry that defined the mid-90s. The feud between artists tied to Death Row Records and Bad Boy Records created an atmosphere where competition sometimes crossed into hostility. Diss tracks, public insults and confrontations at award shows fed a cultural narrative that fans followed almost like a sports rivalry. But behind the music were powerful industry figures with enormous financial stakes. Record sales, touring revenue, and media exposure were all tied to the success of the artists involved. When tensions escalated publicly, the economic pressure behind the scenes only intensified. That environment is part of what makes the idea of a bounty so explosive. If prosecutors were ever able to prove that money was offered to eliminate a rival artist, it would fundamentally reshape how the era is remembered. Instead of being viewed as a tragic escalation of personal conflict, Tupac's death would become evidence of something far darker. A moment when music industry competition allegedly crossed into organized violence. So far, no court has ever reached that conclusion. But the mere possibility keeps the speculation alive. Meanwhile, Sean Diddy Combs continues to fight a series of legal battles that extend far beyond the Tupac case. His 2025 federal sentence, along with the growing list of civil lawsuits against him, has already shaken the business empire he spent decades building. Brands once eager to partner with him have distanced themselves. That vulnerability is one reason some observers believe Keefe D's defense team sees value in forcing Diddy into the courtroom conversation. Even if prosecutors are not directly accusing him of involvement, a subpoena could place him under intense scrutiny at a moment when his public image is already fragile. From a strategic perspective, it is a move that shifts the spotlight. Instead of the trial focusing solely on Keefe D, the narrative suddenly expands to include one of the most powerful figures in hip-hop history. Whether the court allows that strategy to unfold fully remains uncertain. Judges often limit testimony that could confuse jurors or introduce speculation unrelated to the charges at hand. If the bounty narrative cannot be supported with concrete evidence, it may never become a central part of the trial. But even the attempt to introduce it is enough to reignite decades of unresolved suspicion. Outside the courtroom, the story continues to evolve through documentaries, podcasts, and investigative series that revisit the events of the 1990s. One recent documentary project, produced by 50 Cent, has already sparked renewed debate by revisiting old interviews and presenting previously circulated recordings of Keefe discussing the night of the shooting. While those productions are not legal evidence, they shape public perception. For younger audiences who did not experience the East Coast-West Coast era firsthand, these documentaries often serve as their first introduction to the story. As a result, cultural narratives about Tupac's death are constantly being rewritten, even before the courtroom reaches its conclusions. That cultural pressure creates an unusual environment for the trial. It is not just a legal proceeding. It is also a moment of collective reckoning for an industry and a generation of fans who have waited nearly 30 years for answers. Ultimately, the case may hinge on something surprisingly simple: whether jurors believe the earlier version of Keefe.